The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, which felt wrong somehow. Big moments in your life should come with more ceremony than a notification ping while you're halfway through your Vegemite toast. I stared at the subject line. Hargreaves Estate Final Settlement Meeting, Friday 10 a.m., Level 23, Collins Street. My uncle's solicitor had CC'd the entire family, all 7 of them. And then, almost as an afterthought, me. My name sat at the very bottom of the recipient list. Scarlett Voss. Like punctuation, nobody asked for. I set down my toast and looked out the window of my apartment in Fitzroy. The street below was already busy, trams rattling past, a dog walker untangling leads, a cafe propping its chalkboard menu against the footpath. Melbourne, doing what Melbourne does, indifferent to the fact that my world was about to split cleanly in two. My uncle Raymond had passed 6 weeks earlier. He was 71, sharp until the very end, with a dry sense of humor and a habit of sending me articles about urban architecture at midnight with no context. Just a link. Sometimes a single question mark. I'd learned to read his language over the years. That question mark meant, "What do you think? I want your mind on this." He was the only one in the family who ever asked for my mind on anything. The others, my father's side, the Hargreaves branch, had always treated me like a footnote. My mother left when I was 4, which somehow translated, in their accounting, to me being less legitimate, less deserving, less worth the bother of a proper seat at the table. Uncle Raymond never agreed with that. He told me once, over bad coffee at a service station outside Ballarat, that the people who dismiss you quietly are the ones most afraid of what you're capable of. "Don't correct them," he'd said, stirring 3 sugars into a paper cup. "Let them stay comfortable. You'll need that advantage later." I hadn't fully understood what he meant then. I was 23 and still believed that proving yourself loudly was the only way to be heard. I was 29 now. I understood. I RSVP'd to the solicitor's email with a single line, "Confirmed. I'll be there." No one replied to acknowledge it. Friday came with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that Melbourne occasionally produces, like an apology for all its gray weeks. I took the train into the city rather than driving, partly because parking on Collins Street is its own particular punishment, and partly because I wanted the 20 minutes to sit still and think. I wore a navy blazer over a white shirt, dark trousers, simple leather shoes, nothing loud, nothing that invited attention. I'd learned that the most powerful thing you can do when walking into a room that doesn't expect you is to look exactly like you belong there. Not aggressively, just quietly, completely. The building was one of those glass towers that reflects the sky so perfectly it almost disappears into it. I rode the lift to level 23, checked in with the receptionist, and was directed down a corridor toward the main boardroom. Through the glass panel beside the door, I could already see them. My cousin Dominic, standing at the head of the long table, gesturing at something on his laptop. His sister Priya beside him, leaning over to look. My father's brother Gerald settled into a chair at the far end, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead the way he always wore them when he wanted to look like he was paying attention without actually doing so. My Aunt Beverly was unwrapping a blueberry muffin with great focus, as though the meeting's success depended on it. And then there was my father, Richard. He was standing near the window, phone to his ear, laughing at something. He hadn't seen me yet. He had the particular ease of a man who has decided, before anything has started, that the outcome is already settled. I pushed open the door. The conversation didn't stop. Dominic glanced up, registered me, and looked back at his laptop. Priya gave me a small nod, not unfriendly, not warm, just neutral, the diplomatic nod of someone who has been coached not to cause scenes. Gerald didn't look up at all. Aunt Beverly paused mid-unwrap, then resumed. My father lowered his phone and turned. "Scarlett." He said my name the way you'd say, "Here we go, resigned, braced." "You actually came. You were CC'd," Dominic said from across the table, not looking up. "Doesn't mean you needed to make the trip." "It's 20 minutes on the Hurstbridge line," I said pleasantly. "Hardly a burden." Dominic looked up then. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and knew it, and was currently mid-negotiation with the fact that it wasn't quite holding up to 40. He had Uncle Raymond's eyes, which always struck me as unfair, those perceptive, watchful eyes sitting above a personality that had never learned to use them properly. Russ Papadimitriou is joining us shortly, he said, using the solicitor's first name with the familiarity of someone who had already had several private conversations he considered preparatory. There are 7 seats around that table. The family would prefer to discuss the estate matters privately before the formal reading. Privately meaning without me, I said. Privately meaning the immediate family, Aunt Beverly said, and took a large bite of her muffin. I looked at my father. He had the grace, at least, to look slightly uncomfortable. There's a waiting area outside, love. It's quite nice. They have decent coffee. I'm sure they do, I said. And then I did the thing that Uncle Raymond had taught me, whether he intended to or not. I nodded once, pleasantly, and I left. The waiting area was, as advertised, quite nice. Low modern furniture, a wall of frosted glass, a coffee station with an actual espresso machine rather than the capsule kind. I made myself a long, black, sat in a chair with my back to the wall and a clear sightline to both the boardroom door and the lift, and I opened my phone. I had 3 messages waiting. The first was from Theo Okafor, my business partner. How's the lion's den? Remember, you don't need to prove anything today. It already happened. The second was from our legal counsel, a woman named Bridget Lau, who charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent. I'm downstairs. Call when you're ready, and I'll come up. Alternatively, signal when you want the document sent through, and I'll have it on Papadimitriou's desk before he finishes his first paragraph. The third was from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be the building's concierge. Miss Voss, you're 10. 15 has been confirmed in the secondary boardroom on this floor. The AV is set up, and the Collins Street representative confirmed arrival for 10:20. Please let us know if you need anything. I typed back, thank you. We're on track. Then I sat back in the ergonomic chair that probably cost more than my first car, drank my long black, and listened to the muffled sounds of my family, deciding, behind that frosted glass, what they were going to do with everything Raymond had left behind. What they didn't know, what none of them had thought to investigate, because none of them had ever really thought about me at all, was that the most significant decision about Raymond's estate had already been made 2 years ago. Quietly, legally, completely. Uncle Raymond had been ill for longer than any of us knew publicly. He'd told me privately, in the same Ballarat service station, almost exactly 26 months before his death. He'd had a coffee again, this time with only 2 sugars, which I now recognized as the small concession he'd made to his body once the prognosis arrived. I've been thinking, he'd said, about what I want to happen, not what's expected, what I actually want. He'd looked at me for a long moment. I want someone to build something with it, not spend it, not divide it up into portions that disappear into renovations and holidays and school fees. I want it to do something. I had understood then, and I had said yes. The legal process took 3 months and 2 separate sets of solicitors, his and mine, and resulted in a binding agreement that had been lodged with the relevant authorities and registered in the proper places. What Raymond had left in his estate for public distribution, for the reading that was currently being anticipated by 7 people in the next room, was real and not insignificant. The Hargreaves family would not leave empty-handed. But the core of it, the company, the commercial property portfolio, the trust had been structured differently, much earlier, under a different arrangement entirely. I checked the time. Sure, Lingba. I sent Bridget a message. Send it through at 10:12. Give Papadimitriou a moment to get settled first. She replied instantly. Done. At 10:23. The boardroom door opened, and the solicitor's assistant, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, appeared in the waiting area and looked directly at me. Miss Voss? Mr. Papadimitriou is asking for you. Of course, I said, and picked up my coffee. The boardroom was very quiet when I walked in. Quiet, in a specific way, the way rooms get quiet when something has just been said that has rearranged everyone's understanding of a situation. Russ Papadimitriou was at the head of the table, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the expression of someone who has seen everything and has chosen equanimity as his permanent setting. In front of him was an open folder. He was looking at a document I recognized. I had signed one version of it 2 years ago. My family was arranged around the table. Dominic had a look I hadn't seen on his face before, something stripped of its usual confidence, a blankness where the certainty had been. Priya had both hands flat on the table, as though bracing. Gerald had his reading glasses properly on his nose now, actually reading, his brow compressed into something that looked close to alarm. Aunt Beverly had stopped eating. My father was very still. "Scarlett, Mr. Papadimitriou said, and gestured to the empty chair, the one at the opposite end from him, which happened to be at the head of the table's other axis. "Please sit down. I was just beginning to explain the structure of your uncle's estate arrangements to the family." I sat. "What is this?" Dominic said. Not to me, to the solicitor. As though I wasn't there, even now. "It's a binding corporate agreement," Mr. Papadimitriou said, with the patience of a man who has explained complex things to resistant people many times before, executed in March 2024. "Your uncle, Raymond Hargreaves, transferred the controlling interest of Hargreaves Holdings, which includes the Commercial Property Trust, the South Bank Development Stake, and the Geelong Logistics subsidiary, into a newly formed entity called Ember and Voss Developments." He paused. "Miss? Scarlett Voss holds 60% of that entity. A further 30% is held in charitable trust, as specified by Raymond. The remaining 10% is allocated to key personnel in the business, also as per Raymond's instructions." The room was very quiet. "That's not possible," Dominic said. "It is, in fact, quite thoroughly documented." He would have told us. This was my father, his voice lower than I expected, directed somewhere in the middle distance. He would have said something. "Raymond chose to structure it privately," Mr. Papadimitriou said, which was entirely his right. The document was executed by 2 independent legal firms, registered with ASIC, and has been valid for 26 months. It predates the commencement of any discussions about the estate by nearly 2 years. I had not planned to say anything yet. I'd intended to let the solicitor handle the formal part completely, to sit quietly and let the information settle. But Dominic looked up at me then, and what I saw in his face wasn't grief or confusion, or even the anger I'd expected. It was something that looked a great deal like contempt, as though even now, even with a legal document on the table between us, he was deciding that this must be a trick, a maneuver, something underhanded, because the alternative was to accept that he had comprehensively misjudged me for a very long time. "You planned this," he said. "You got to him when he was sick." I let a moment pass before I answered. "Raymond came to me," I said. "He had a vision for what he'd built, and he wanted someone who would carry it forward deliberately. He chose me because we'd been talking about development strategy for years. Because when he sent me a link at midnight, I actually read it. I kept my voice even. This wasn't a manipulation. It was a conversation between 2 people who understood each other. You could have had that conversation with him too. He was available to all of you." Another silence. "The distribution of remaining estate assets, the residential property, the investment accounts, the personal effects proceeds exactly as Raymond specified in his will," Mr. Papadimitriou said, steering the room back toward the practical. "The family is not excluded from the estate. The company structure was a separate matter." "What about the Collins Street property?" Gerald asked. His voice was measured, but his hands weren't. They were pressed flat on the table, the way hands go when you are trying to stop them from doing something else. "Part of the commercial portfolio," I said, "under Ember and Voss." Gerald took his glasses off and set them on the table, very carefully. "Raymond discussed the Collins Street development with me for 2 years, Dominic said. I was advising him on the Geelong expansion," I said. "I know," he told me. "He appreciated your input on the logistics framework. That's actually why he allocated the Geelong subsidiary 10% to key personnel. The operations manager there, a woman named Sandra Chu, has been running that site since 2019. She's part of the personnel allocation." Dominic blinked. "He thought about everyone," I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. He thought about it for a long time. The formal part of the meeting concluded an hour later. Mr. Papa Demetrio was efficient and exact, and by the end, the documents had been reviewed, the distributions noted, and the questions, most of them, anyway, had been answered. What remained were the ones that couldn't be answered in a boardroom. Why Raymond had made the choices he had, whether he'd meant it as a statement, whether there was something the family had failed to see. I didn't have answers to those questions. Or rather, I had my own answers, and they weren't mine to give. Dominic left without speaking to me. Priya paused at the door, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something. Her mouth opened and then closed, and then she followed her brother out. Gerald and Aunt Beverly left together, Gerald's hand on her elbow, both of them quiet in a way they hadn't been when they arrived. My father stayed. He was still sitting at the table when the room had emptied, looking at the window. The light had shifted while we were inside clouds moving through, the city below doing its mid-morning business completely unconcerned. "You could have told me," he said finally. "It wasn't mine to tell," I said. "It was Raymond's. His arrangement, his timeline, his disclosure. He was my brother." "He was," I said. "And he loved you. That's why the residential property in Mount Eliza goes to you, and why the Dalesford cottage goes to Gerald, and why there's a trust for Dominic's kids' education. He thought about you. He just also thought about me." My father was quiet for a while. He had aged, I noticed, in the last 6 weeks. Or perhaps I was simply looking at him differently, not as the man who had allowed me to be subtracted from his family's arithmetic for 20 years, but as a person who was grieving, and who was also, now, confronted with evidence that the person he'd been grieving had a life none of them had fully seen. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "The company." "Build something," I said. That was what Raymond wanted. "I have a development project in the western suburbs, affordable housing, mixed use, sustainable design. We've been in planning for 18 months. Collins Street is the anchor investor. Theo Okafor, my business partner, he's been working on the community consultation side for over a year. We break ground in March." My father looked at me for a long moment. "I didn't know you were doing all that," he said. "No," I said gently. "You didn't." I met Theo downstairs at a cafe on Collins Street an hour later. He was at a corner table with 2 flat whites already ordered, his notebook open, his pen behind his ear. He had the specific energy of a person who has been waiting and has used the time productively. "How'd it go?" he asked. I sat down and picked up the coffee. It went. "Dominic?" Gone before I could say anything to him directly. Theo nodded. He'd heard enough about Dominic over the years to have a clear picture. "And your dad?" He asked what we're going to do with it. "What'd you say?" Told him about the Footscray project. The housing. March groundbreaking. Theo smiled, the real one, not the polished one he used in meetings. Raymond would have loved that. He would have sent me 12 links about innovative concrete formulations at 2 in the morning, and then asked a single question mark, I said. Theo laughed. We sat for a while with the comfortable silence of people who have worked alongside each other long enough to not need to fill every moment. Outside, the lunchtime crowd was beginning to build on the footpath. A tram went past, ringing its bell for no particular reason. Melbourne, continuing. "Bridget is filing the ASIC notification this afternoon," Theo said. "Back to business. The board meeting for the new entity is scheduled for the 28th. Sandra Chu from Geelong confirmed she can attend in person, which is good. She should be in the room for the personnel allocation conversation." "Agreed," I said. "And the Footscray Council liaison wants to do a site walk next Thursday. Are you free?" "I'll make myself free." Theo ticked something off in his notebook. "You know," he said, not looking up, 2 years ago, when Raymond first called me to talk through the idea of you taking over the entity, I was skeptical. Not about you, about the complexity. The family situation, the legal structure, all the moving pieces. I remember. I think I said something like, "This is going to create a significant conflict at the settlement stage." You said it was going to be a storm, I said. Those were your exact words. And was it? I thought about the boardroom, the quiet, Dominic's face, my father at the window, Priya, with her hands flat on the table, more like a front moving through, I said. Clear skies now. Theo raised his flat white. To Raymond. To Raymond, I said. and to not waiting to be invited to your own life. In the weeks that followed, things settled not easily, not without friction, but with the particular inevitability of things that have already been decided and simply need time to be absorbed. Dominic sent a formal letter through his solicitor requesting clarification on 3 points of the corporate agreement. Bridget handled it. The clarifications were provided. The points were, as she put it, entirely without legal merit, but entirely understandable given the circumstances. She recommended patience and procedural correctness, which we applied. Priya reached out to me directly, by text, about 3 weeks after the meeting. The message was careful and brief. I'd like to understand the development project better, if you're open to it. Not for any legal reason. I'm a town planner. I might actually be useful, I replied. Thursday site walk, 9 a.m., Footscray. Bring boots. She came. She was, as it turned out, extremely useful. She knew the council planning framework better than our consultant did, and spent 45 minutes on-site identifying 2 potential design issues we hadn't seen. By the end of the morning, she had Theo's email address and a standing invitation to the project working group. Families are not simple. They are layered and contradictory, and full of people who love each other imperfectly and hurt each other without always meaning to, and who are capable, sometimes, of doing better if given the actual opportunity. I wasn't naive about that. I didn't walk out of the Collins Street boardroom expecting resolution. What I expected, what I'd worked toward, was simply to be in a position where I could make choices about the company, about the project, about who I let into my work and on what terms. Raymond had given me that. Not by handing me something easy, but by trusting me with something real. My father called me on a Sunday evening, about a month after the settlement meeting. I was in my Fitzroy apartment, going through development renders on my laptop, a half-eaten bowl of pasta cooling on the bench. I've been thinking, he said, after a few minutes of the kind of tentative conversation we'd been practicing since that Friday. About what you said. About Raymond sending you links. Yeah? He used to do that to me too, my father said. When we were young, he'd cut articles out of the newspaper, we're talking actual newspaper, with scissors and slide them under my bedroom door. Architecture, mostly. Urban planning. He was obsessed with cities and how they worked. I hadn't known that. I stopped reading them, my father said. After a while, life got busy, and I think I started to find it embarrassing, him being so earnest about things. I thought he'd grow out of it. He didn't, I said. No, my father said. He just found someone else to send them to. We were quiet for a moment. I'd like to see the Footscray project, he said. Not to have any input. I'd like to see what you're building. Come to the groundbreaking in March, I said. Bring a jacket. It'll be cold. Right, he said. Yeah, okay. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a sudden rearrangement of 20 years of distance, but it was something a door opened, a crack, light coming through the edge of it. I was willing to see what grew in that light, given time. The groundbreaking happened on a Wednesday morning in early March, which is technically still summer in Melbourne, but felt like autumn overcast, cool, the smell of rain somewhere to the west. The site on Barclay Street had been cleared and fenced, and someone had put up a banner along the hoarding that read Ember and Voss, Footscray Residential and Community Hub Est, 2026. There were about 40 people there. The council representative gave a short speech. The architects presented a scale model. Sandra Chu, who had driven up from Geelong the night before, stood next to me during the formalities and made quiet, accurate observations about the crowd dynamics that I filed away for future reference. Priya was there, in proper site boots. Theo stood beside me with his notebook, because he always has his notebook. My father came. He stood at the back of the small crowd, in a good coat, and he watched. When the speeches were done and people were moving toward the morning tea table, he found his way over to me. It's bigger than I expected, he said, looking at the site. Phase 1 is 82 units, I said, plus ground floor retail and a community kitchen. Phase 2 will add another 40 if the planning goes through. He nodded slowly. Raymond would have started. Sent me 12 links, I said. My father laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of him, genuine. It sounded like something I half remembered from when I was very young, before things became complicated. Yeah, he said. He would have. There are things we build with our hands, and things we build with our patience, and things we build with our silence in the moments when others expect us to be small. The hardest structures are always the ones begun underground, out of sight, without an audience, the foundations that no one sees until the walls go up and people finally understand what they're looking at. Uncle Raymond knew that. He built his whole life on the principle that what you do quietly and with intention outlasts everything you could say loudly. I think about that on the hard days, the days when a decision is complicated, or a negotiation drags, or someone in a room full of glass and steel looks at me and decides, before I've spoken, what I am and am not capable of. I think. They're allowed to think that, and I'm allowed to keep working. The cement truck arrived at 10:15. The site manager handed me a helmet and a high-vis vest that was several sizes too large, and Theo took a photo that he later posted on the company's page with the caption, "Day 1 of something that matters." I looked out at the cleared ground, at the outline of what would eventually be walls and windows and doorways, and homes where people would live their complicated, layered, imperfect lives. And I thought about a woman who had sat in a waiting room on level 23 of a Collins Street tower, drinking a long black and waiting for the right moment, not out of timidity, but out of strategy. Not because she had been pushed aside, but because she had learned that the person who moves last moves best. You don't prove your worth by demanding to be seen. You prove it by building something so real, so solid, so undeniably present, that it stands long after the argument about whether you belonged in the room has been forgotten entirely. That's what Raymond taught me. Not in any single lesson, but in the accumulated weight of midnight links and 2 sugar coffees, and a single question mark that always meant the same thing. What do you think? I want your mind on this. He wanted my mind on this, so I gave it everything I had. And now the walls go up.